Welcome to Normandy, June 6th, 1944, Omaha Beach, where the sea is tearing itself apart. This is the moment a wounded black medic crawled out of a landing craft and refused to die quietly. Waves slam the sand like hammers. Steel hedgehogs split the tide. A barrage balloon claws at the gray sky. He is bleeding. He is calm. And then he starts tying bandages one after another, while the beach tries to erase every name written on it. June, Normandy, rain in the throat of the wind. LCVPs belch men into the surf. The 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion wrestles the weather as much as the war. And beside them, a corporal with an M1 helmet slick with brine, building a field aid station from nothing but resolve and gauze. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and the exact timestamp you hit play. Was it in a quiet room, a crowded bus, or under midnight headphones? Your moment matters because on this beach, seconds decided who was remembered and who was forgotten. June 1944. The channel breathes like a cold animal. In-out. A gray lung of water and wind. Night loosens its grip reluctantly, and the first light doesn't so much arrive as hover. The sea keeps its secrets. The shore keeps its geometry. And men small determined row their courage into the gap between. Call this place Omaha. Call the sand by its lettered sectors easy, dog, fox, names that try to domesticate the wild. The air ignores names. It slicks every sleeve with salt needles, every cheek with rain folds, grit into every blink. It is the same breath whether it passes a general, a private, or a medic kneeling where the surf claws the shore. Ahead, the obstacles. Check hedgehogs, black ribs against a paling sky. Teller mine posts, patient teeth. Angled rails welded and stubborn points seaward, like accusations. Between them, the ocean rehearses violence. A wave rears, breaks, drags back. Another rises, a metronome set by a distant hand. Farther up the bluffs where concrete nests wait, slit-eyed and calm. The kind of calm that belongs to people who have planned the first minutes of a stranger's morning. Dawn becomes rumor, then pressure, then a thin, peeled light. For a heartbeat, the water goes glassy a trick, and in the trick, you can hear the intimate noises of men, the clack of an oar against metal, the rasp of a breath swallowed too fast. The counting voice of a coxswain who knows numbers are the last tool left when certainty fails. The glass shatters, and with it the neatness of plans. Now listen the engines. LCVPs cough the sea into froth, their flat noses nudging toward an argument with land. Behind them, LCTs and LCIs herd steel tanks, bulldozers, awkward amphibians with blunt faith in torque and teeth. Woven among them, not loud, but deliberate, is a quieter thread men in olive drab guiding spools, hugging crates, speaking the grammar of cables and canvas. The 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. Black soldiers, segregated by policy, indispensable by physics. Balloons on a battlefield. It sounds whimsical until you calculate metal against momentum. Fabric bodies, gas-swollen silver gray straining upward. Cable lines angling into the damp air, invisible threats to low-swooping wings. A pilot sees one line, then two, then a scatter of small moons with leashes, and makes a simple decision: higher or home. Either way, fewer bullets seam the lanes where men will run. But the wind does not salute a plan. It heckles. It plucks at sleeves, gnaws at gloves, steals breath from open mouths. Rain needles the skin. Spray baptizes the unready and the ready alike. Sand pretends to be stone, then soup, then trap. Every step is an argument settled by weight and luck. And still the men of the 320th move. Pay out the cable, hold, check the winch, lift. Small sentences spoken into a morning that wants to swallow sound. Close the frame, just a little, to a corporal in the swarm of tasks. Black, helmet wet, jaw set but not clenched, eyes tuned to the frequencies of pain and breath. An aid kit rides his chest, not a talisman, simply a toolbox. His hands know the old verbs press, tie, splint, count, and the newer ones the beach will teach crawl, shield, wait, speak. He is not supposed to be anyone's headline today. He is supposed to be the reason someone else can live long enough to make one. Segregation came across the water in crates and orders. Separate tents, separate mess, separate chains of authority, written in tidy lines. The surf smears those lines. Shock waves do not segregate. Metal does not ask a man which table he ate at. Blood dark and honest is the same argument in every body. A medic's hands answer that argument immediately, intimately, without looking up to check a memo. Spread the scene wider. Balloon sections muscling anchors through sucking sand. Two men leaning their backs into a line while a gust bows a gas-filled belly. Another pair coaxing a reluctant winch to pay out smooth instead of snarling. A tank coughs and drowns its exhaust in churned surf. A bulldozer patient as geology chews a ramp into a lip of earth. A chaplain kneels just long enough to whisper something the wind carries away. The beach is not a place. It is a procession of tasks, of risks, of small victories no one will film. What does it smell like? Really wet canvas souring into wool. Gasoline with salt spray top notes. The metallic sweetness of cordite, the peeled apple iron of blood. The medic's gloves learn the scent and won't forget not for days. He tells himself there will be a later, a basin, a rag, a breath, but the tide writes its schedule in another ink. Fear does not announce itself with trumpets. It hums low, steady under the counting voice. It hides in choice which cry to answer first. Which artery deserves your thumb right now? Whether the morphine gets bent toward this man or that one. Whether your own blood in your boot is later or now. Fear sits in the corners nodding. The hands keep moving because movement talks louder. Above the first balloon's climb, not many. Just enough to redraw the morning. Cables glitter where spray kisses them. Small harp strings the wind plucks to an invisible tune. Somewhere beyond the gray, a pilot chooses caution instead of swagger. That choice, invisible to the camera, ripples outward fewer strafing runs, wider lanes, seconds saved. The tiny, durable math by which lives are kept. Return to the corporal. He finds an angle on the world, the lee of a mangled obstacle, the shrug of a dune, and he edits the weather with canvas and body. Shelter half over a crate becomes a roof. His shoulder between grit and a patient's face becomes a wall. Words short and exact become bridges. Breathe, hold, stay with me. Look here. No poetry but a music anyway. The cadence by which a mind steps back from a precipice. And then the larger music, the armada humming beyond eyesight. The war's hinge creaks here, though the hinge denies commentary. Men move because the clock says so, because every craft behind them needs a lane, because what is asked today can only be answered today. The 320th shoulders against the heckling wind, one more anchor, one more line, one more lift to the gray. The medic's shoulders against time, one more bandage, one more pulse, one more breath coached back into rhythm. There's another layer, older than this morning, older than this war, that mutters under the practical tasks service without the headline. Duty with an asterisk. The nation earnest flawed has brought its arithmetic across the channel what is owed, what is granted, what is postponed. The men of the 320th are not blind to the math. And still they move, they work. They pull a piece of safety out of difficult air and hand it to strangers without asking for the arithmetic to change first. Fix a picture in your mind. Not the poster version, but the quiet one. A gas shape tugging its line, a cable singing a thin note, a knot holding because two tired hands believed in friction, a breath taken because another man kneeled in the wet sand and decided his own blood could wait. These are small hinges, and the day swings on them. The beach breathes, the sea argues. The wind asks rude questions. The medic answers none of them directly. He answers a man at his elbow, and then another 2 yards away, and then someone carried in on a door. The 320th arranges the sky into a geometry of caution. The bulldozer edits the dune. The tank claws forward a body length at a time. Everything is bought in inches and seconds. Look once more slowly at what the morning has become. Light thickens, not bright, but usable. Smoke layers the bluffs in gauze. The hazards remain. So do the tasks. Yet in the churn, you can feel a tilt, not a victory, not yet a lean toward rhythm. Lanes open, gestures repeat. Muscles remember what they must do, and somewhere in the thin distance between spray and sky, the first rumor of a path inland begins to breathe. Hold the frame. Keep the sound low. Notice the details, a tag pinned with a name and blood type. A stretcher's canvas, darkening where it touches a coat. A medic's thumb, steady on a wound. The line of a balloon cable drawn like a pencil stroke across the cloud. This is the stage, not heroic, not tidy. Prepared for a story, the beach will try to erase, and the day will try to keep. The wind still heckles. The sea still chews. The bluffs still watch. And the quiet man, wet helmet, calm eyes, bloody gloves, keeps choosing the same answer. Again and again. One knot, one pulse, one life. At a time. Facts first. Paper before pulse. The way archivists like to stack a day so it won't collapse. On one pile, orders of the day, unit rosters, embarkation tables, neat columns, serif fonts, dates that refuse drama. On another, medical logs, casualty tallies, scribbled notes on field tags gone soft with seawater. Somewhere in between, telegrams that cross the ocean in clipped, breathless phrases. And under it all, the quiet hum of segregation written into policy. The arithmetic of who is allowed near glory and who is assigned to guard it from a distance. Open the folder marked 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion, and you can smell the dried glue of pasted clippings, a few edges browned by time. The facts do not shout. They insist. A black unit trained to raise and tend barrage balloons to stitch an invisible fence across a sky men would rather race through with wings and guns. Training at Camp Tyson. Check. Winches types capacities. Check. Cable gauges, balloon volumes, hydrogen and helium tables, the alchemy of lift quantified into columns. The men's names last, first, last, captured in roll calls that feel like ledgers of promises. Then D-Day. A movement order that looks almost simple with distance. Embarkation complete. Proceed to designated sectors. Deploy balloon sections upon landing as wind and terrain permit. The beach names arrive, the lettered sectors that sound almost friendly if you've never met them. The margins carry pencil scars, wind estimates, coil lengths, anchor placements sketched in tired hands. This is how history walks toward a storm, with diagrams that believe in the world behaving. Across the desk, another stack. Medical detachments. Names of medics spread thin against maps too wide for the number of hands. Field kits inventoried down to the last syringe. Morphine, sulfa bandage rolls, commas of mercy. The planned ratios, how many medics per company's landed, the math that makes sense until water and metal and panic ruin arithmetic. There's a line official and bland about anticipated casualties. Numbers in the abstract, until each number walks ashore with a face. And then the press. The big city papers like to swallow days like this and spit them back as headlines with ribs of iron. Early stories are cautious ocean fog leaks easily into sentences. Later pieces grow bolder, a knack for bravery finds the ink. Here and there in the columns that weren't supposed to be about heroism, the small mentions balloons up by mid-morning. Cables seen glittering in mist, a medic who worked without rest. No names. Not at first. Names require certainty, and certainty moves slower than rumor. What doesn't move slow is policy. In folders that travel with the unit are memoranda on segregation, the rules that say who eats where, sleeps, where reports to whom. They look absurd under salt. Yet they persist. The paper never blushes. On the same day, a black medic crouches in surf to press a hand into a wound that will not close a clerk somewhere, reminds him on paper where his tent is supposed to stand. Two truths, each iron colliding at a beach where everything is already colliding. Return to the medical records. Scan for an entry that is not quite neat. Treated approximately, followed by a number too large for one pair of hands. Under fire, followed by no embellishment as if the pencil declined adjectives. Self-treated shrapnel wound, resume duty. A sentence that reads like a cough swallowed so work can continue. There are hours missing, or rather hours condensed into a line, the way lightning fits a tree into a scorch. A narrative can stretch time, forms cannot. So the form writes what it can bear, duty performed. On the operations side, the balloon sections list anchors, emplaced cable lengths, paid out adjustments for gusts and shifting sand. Someone adds almost as an afterthought, enemy aircraft discouraged, strafing limited. It is not poetry, but it is a lyric in the language of safety. The sky edited by black hands, made fractionally inhospitable to sudden death. This is what the 320th came to do. The page affirms they did it. Facts. Facts. And still there is a smell of something else in the stack. You find it not in official prose, but in margins. In a corporal's tight script sang while lifting steadier with breath. In a sergeant's after-action men steadied others humming. Songs do not fit into inventories, so they sneak into the edges. Work songs, spirituals, scraps of hymns hammered into the rhythm of winch handles. Not superstition, not exactly, more like the sound of muscles agreeing with one another in the rain. Now the other stack, the one archivists mark ephemera because they don't know what else to call it. Letters home censored, yes, but stubborn enough to smuggle tone. Mama, the sea got teeth. One begins, and you can hear the smile behind the grit. Another admits, I prayed, then I worked, then I prayed while working. There is a postcard never sent sand. Erase the address with 4 words penciled in the blank space, I am still here. Facts, if you tilt your head a little. And then, folklore, the low voice with strong hands. It arrives wrapped in other people's words. A private from a neighboring unit swears he saw a balloon pull the sky down. He means a fighter skimmed low. A cable spoke physics. The pilot chose not to die. An engineer says there was a blue note in the wind. Around the cables, a hum you could feel in your teeth if you touched the anchor. He is not wrong. The wind sings on wire, every sailor knows that. But the engineer adds a second sentence quieter. It sounded like home. Another story whispered in a tent where wet wool steamed says a medic on the beach was never alone. Men insist they saw someone kneeling behind him, a shadow, a grandfather, a shape of protection that steps into the spray when the mortars lift. You can call it exhaustion. You can call it focus, so fierce it throws a double onto the world. The men called it help, and the word helped them more than any argument. There are older rivers feeding this day. The WPA slave narratives recorded in another decade, another crisis talk about dreams that watamras that warn, songs that shield, the hand you feel on your shoulder when no one is in the room. Those pages don't belong to this beach. Not directly, yet the music underneath is the same. Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, someone hums near a winch, and a cable pays out smoother than before. A man ties a tourniquet, and his lips move around a line his grandmother taught him about binding and breath. The beach doesn't care what you say, but the hands do. And the hands are what keep men living long enough to argue about metaphysics later. The press has its folklore too, compressed into phrases that travel farther than context. They said we couldn't fight. By the time it reaches a kitchen table in Chicago, a stoop in Harlem, a church basement in Baltimore, it's already begun to transform from insult into fuel. The phrase hikes its own weight like a rucksack and marches straight into recruiting offices, factory floors, pulpits. Folklore doesn't have to be old. Sometimes it is minted in the morning and spends itself by night, only to be reminted again the next day. Back to the paper spine of the day, the casualty lists, grim columns, names that are not stories yet. A few carry the note fate unknown. Bureaucracy's way of admitting the ocean edits aggressively. Those two words migrate. They show up later in families' vocabulary and lullabies that learn to leave a chair empty at the table. On the beach, though, fate unknown is not permitted near a man still breathing. The medic takes a pencil and writes a new fate on a field tag evacuated. Later, another hand will add lived. Not every fact is kind. There are remarks about colored troops in briefs that sit in folders with the spine barely cracked. The words are clinical, confident wrong. And yet 2 inches to the left, in the same drawer, a report lines out a dozen instances where balloons deterred strafers, where lanes cleared, where landings accelerated because the air became slightly less murderous. The beach writes a rebuttal across both pages. Effectiveness measured not in adjectives, but in lives not ended. Folklore keeps pace. By the second night, men swear the balloons are listening. As the wind changes, they say the fabric bodies tilt toward danger, like pointers. They do not. Physics has no ears, but it helps to believe your tools want what you want. An infantryman swears the cable vibrated a warning seconds before a mortar walked in. Another says he followed the line like a tether, out of panic, hand to hand to hand, until he found a medic's voice and the ground stopped tilting under his knees. If you want to be literal, call it chance. If you want to live with yourself, call it a sign you were meant to find. There is also inevitably a ghost story. On some retellings it's dawn, in others dusk. The light is always the color of wet steel. A man hit and half gone hears singing. Not the medic this time, not anyone near a choir threading the wind. He says later it was a church choir from home. His mother's alto perfect and impossible braiding with the ocean. He lives. He insists the song kept his heart orderly until the bandage and the morphine could do their jobs. Try to argue with that. The counter-argument has no music. The records close their ranks. The day tightens into its column. Balloons deployed. Medic treated Yenex casualties. Enemy air activity minimal at low altitude. It reads like rain. But between the lines and gaps that are the right size for a breath, something else glows. Work done under conditions that would bankrupt hope. Repeated, steady, quiet. A geometry of safety stitched by men whose country had not yet learned how to honor them without qualification. And the medic, the one the paperwork can't quite hold because the hours were too long and the acts too repetitive to catalog moves through both worlds. In fact, his kit empties and refills. His gloves stain and are replaced. His body argues with shrapnel and keeps negotiating. In folklore, he is doubled a man, and a promise the kind you sense beside you when the wind goes dark. The two versions do not compete. They complete. One writes the ledger, the other writes the reason. At last a final sheet, typed late edges still crisp. Recommendations for decoration. The language is cautious, the way careful men are when they know the committee is colder than the day they're describing. It lists actions, durations, witness statements. It does not mention songs, shadows, the taste of cordite on a whispered hymn, the way a cable's hum taught a frightened heart a steadier rhythm. It can't. Paper isn't built for that. But the people are, and the people remember. And memory, being stubborn and social, passes what paper cannot carry from mouth to mouth, pew to pew, kitchen to kitchen, until a name no longer needs a committee to endure. That is the hinge of this part of the story, fact and folklore. Walking side by side, neither superior, each correcting the other's blindness. The forms keep the numbers honest. The whispers keep the meaning alive. The 320th lifts moons into a hostile sky. The medic buys time from a greedy tide. And in the spaces between those acts, a chorus builds, not quite heard, not quite seen, insisting that courage can be quiet, that skill can be sacred, that lives saved are a kind of hymn. The beach will forget as fast as it can. The records will misplace as neatly as they must. But the song finds ways to continue in the vibrato of a cable, in wind, in a bandage tied with a grandmother's rhythm, in a phrase once meant to belittle becoming a drumbeat. They said we couldn't fight, and we answered with helium and rope, with gauze and grit, with a ledger of lives that kept their names. The tide has already turned twice, and still the work does not stop. The air smells of iron and salt, of mud cordite and faith. The beach Omaha breathes like a wounded animal that refuses to lie down. And through that breath, the rhythm of the 320th continues. The first hours had been chaos cables, snarling anchors, slipping men shouting over the wind that stole their words. But now, midday, the rhythm tightens. Balloon after balloon lifts into the bruised sky, each one rising against the disbelief that followed these men across an ocean. The black soldiers move with a precision no manual can teach. Synchrony born from something older than drills, born from work songs, from churches, from kitchens, where call and response was the language of survival. One balloon, its canvas slick with mist, buckles under a gust. Two men wrestle the line. One slips, dragged knee-deep into the surf. The corporal, the medic, drops his kit without thought. He runs. A hand seizes the cable fingers, burning. The balloon jerks again, its pulls strong enough to lift, to snap, to drag. And then three more men join, leaning back, boots digging into sand that refuses to stay still. Together they win. The balloon steadies. The medic breathes out once, twice, then picks up his kit again. Someone laughs too loudly and the sound fractures into the sky like a flare. They laugh because it means they're still here, still working, still proving wrong every whisper that sailed with them from home. Beyond the dunes, the enemy still answers occasional shells walking toward the water in slow, deliberate steps. Each impact folds a crater into the sand. Each echo folds into memory. One lands too close. A balloon shreds open, hissing gas flapping like torn lungs. The winch screams as cable whips through metal. And in the middle of it, a voice, medic. He runs toward the sound knees, cutting through sand water, biting the wound in his own leg. Two men down, one breathing ragged, one not breathing at all. The medic kneels. He does not look at the body first. He looks at the living. Look at me, he says low, certain. He cuts cloth ties, pressure presses until the red stops spreading. He does not count the shells anymore. He counts breaths. Each one that returns he keeps. Each one that doesn't, he folds away somewhere quiet for later. The cable still smokes. Someone shouts for help to retrieve it. He stands limping, ties the wounded arm in place, signals another medic, then moves toward the winch. Because duty has no pause button. Because on a day like this, even mercy is logistics. By afternoon, the sea is littered with debris planks, helmets, shards of story. And still the balloons rise. 20-30 by dusk, the sky holds more than 50. Silver-gray orbs straining against ropes like the ghosts of small moons, each one tethered by men whose names no one will read for decades. From the command ships, the sight is surreal. The officers, white proper efficient note, the pattern through binoculars. Balloon stable, someone writes. Enemy air activity, minimal. The report will travel upward smooth, precise. It will not mention the hands that bled on the winches, nor the song hummed under breath to keep those hands from shaking. Then, an hour that begins quiet. A lull that feels borrowed. And in that lull, stories begin. Stories whispered while mending cables, while wrapping wounds, while waiting for the next decision the sea will make. A man from Georgia says he saw a figure walking between the waves, steady upright, untouched by spray. Looked like my daddy, he murmurs. The others nod. No one laughs. Another says the balloons move different at night, like they're listening. Someone else says he heard a hum under the wind, same note as the church organ back home. The medic listens but doesn't speak. He just raps another dressing, hums, low, lets their stories steady his own breath. War needs more than orders to hold a line. It needs belief, even if belief takes strange shapes under fire. Night comes late, dragging its edges through smoke. Searchlights scratch the sky like claws. Tracer fire weaves luminous handwriting no one can read. The balloons shimmer in that uncertain light, guardians against low-flight watchers of chaos. The 320th tends them still, eyes burning, gloves stiff with salt. They anchor cables, replace damaged envelopes, feed the winches like altar fires. Somewhere far above, pilots curse the web in the clouds and steer away. It works. The arithmetic of survival tilts. Down below, between the hedgehogs and the bodies, the medic builds what passes for a clinic. A half-shelter of tarpaulin and sandbags. A table scavenged from a crate, morphine counted with trembling hands. He binds, he stitches, he prays without words. A sergeant arrives, dragging another man by the collar. Caught shrapnel, he says. The medic nods. Hold him. He works fast, too fast. The pain cracks the man's voice, then breaks it. When it's done, the medic sits back for a moment, just long enough to realize his own shoulder is bleeding again. He binds it himself, slow, one-handed, quiet. Then stands. There is no applause, only another voice outside the tent dock. Another one, and he goes. Past midnight. The fog rolls heavier. The beach glows faintly burnt magnesium in the air. The balloons look like bruised stars tethered to earth. And somewhere beyond the surf, the low steady beat of engines, reinforcements coming in. Men stumble ashore, exhausted, whispering thanks to any name that feels holy. They step under those strange floating guardians and feel, maybe for the first time, that someone is watching from above who is not an enemy. One of them, a lieutenant from another regiment, stops near the medic's station. He stares at the blood, the stretchers, the lantern light. He mutters almost to himself, "Didn't think we'd have colored medics this far forward." The medic doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. The proof lies in the breathing bodies around them, in the bandages cooling on the sand, in the sky stitched by balloons that keep death higher than it wants to be. The folklore grows with every breath. Someone swears the balloons glow faint blue before a strike. Someone else says the medic never blinks. There are whispers that he touched a dying man's chest and the pulse returned like tide. Myth, yes, but also memory trying to make sense of what courage looks like when it's quiet. A young private, eyes wide, tells another, if he's near you, you live. And that in war is enough to turn a man into a legend before his own shift ends. By dawn, the sea changes color again, steel into amber. The medic wipes his hands on his coat, checks the stretchers, counts the morphine left, not much. He looks at the waves. They look back. The balloons sway above him, dozens now, each one a quiet argument with gravity. Somewhere artillery coughs from farther inland, and the sound feels distant, unreal. The medic sits for a heartbeat, breathes, and in the stillness hears something impossible, a humming. Low, steady. The same tone as before. From the cables overhead, singing softly with the morning wind. He closes his eyes. Maybe it's just metal and physics. Maybe it's the echo of a song once heard in a pew, in a different life, in a safer world. He doesn't chase the answer. He just lets it fold around him for a second, warm, improbable human. Facts will later call this Day 1. Reports will log minimal low-altitude air interference. Awards will be proposed, delayed, misfiled. Names will go missing between typewriters. But on the sand between sea and sky, the truth was simpler. Every man still breathing owed part of that breath to someone who refused to rest. And somewhere in the humming between rope and wind, in the dim glow of lanterns flickering against the dawn, you can almost hear it, not a prayer, not a song, just the rhythm of hands that would not stop moving, the whisper of a promise kept, and the slow, unbroken pulse of a man the sea could not take. Facts return, as if the beach itself had a filing cabinet, drawers that stick, labels that fade, but paper that somehow survives. We open the second stack, not the breathless dispatches from Day 1, but the cooler later pages. After-action reports, sworn statements, cross-checked logs. Army depositions begin with ritual sobriety unit rank time, and then, almost grudgingly, give ground to the weather, the wind, the human. Low-altitude enemy air. Discouraged by barrage balloons deployed by colored troops, a typed line reads, clipped neutral, yet stubborn as a nail. Another report same week, medical aid rendered under fire for extended period. Casualty stabilization enabled further movement inland. No adjectives, just cause and effect. Physics and anatomy edited by patience. Further back in the drawer, maps. Not beach maps, older ones, migration routes traced with tired pencils. Exodusters arrowing up the page. Kansas, Oklahoma. The long diaspora, after Reconstruction's brief promise, faltered. The lines cross counties like veins. You look at them and understand these men standing under balloons, this medic kneeling in the surf. They are descendants of people who packed a nation into wagons and hymns and moved toward a horizon that sometimes moved away. The habit of endurance has a geography. Flipped newspapers, not only war columns, but the pulse of Harlem press 1920s to now. Headlines that learned a new verb to insist. They said we couldn't fight an editorial, will eventually say half, quote, half challenge. Long before this day, those pages argued with the nation's mirrors, demanded that reflection and reality agree. And after this day, they will argue with the nation's memory. Ask why it takes so long to recognize what was obvious under fire. Back to the sworn statements. An engineer lieutenant describes approaching Omaha under a ceiling stitched with cables and balloon bodies. He notes as if measuring a beam that strafing decreased along sections where the 320th's geometry held. A Navy coxswain mentions a Negro medic working without pause. Saw him twice, once near the Hedgehogs, later by a makeshift station, and says nothing else because the work was visible, and visibility does not require adjectives. Some statements carry the careful caution of men who know committees wait on the far shore. Recommend recognition, they say, never demand. Extraordinary devotion to duty, never hero. The language tiptoes, but the facts stand flat-footed. And yet, folklore grows in the shadow of paper. Not as a rival, but as a spine the paper sometimes lacks. It arrives through ritual, through dreams, through the way a story is told at a table where the good chair stays empty because someone did not come home. It arrives in chapel songs, in field hums, in the breath between lines. A sergeant remembers a night shift with wind that had the voice of a saw. He swears the balloon cables sang in tune with "Guide Me, O Thou, Great Jehovah." He is not a fanciful man. He handled winches, not incense. But he uses the word hymn anyway. He says the note steadied the crew, kept the line from jerking, kept hands from panicking when the gusts punched. Science can name the hum frequency tension angle, but science cannot name why a hum becomes courage. There are dream narratives too, recorded later by wives, by sons, by men who woke sweating in rooms far from salt air. The dreams are simple: a road that will not end, a hand on a shoulder that weighs nothing and everything, a shore where the dead do not speak, only watch. In one, the medic walks inland through wheat higher than his waist. He cannot see the sky. Then he hears a cable vibration, thin, pure, and follows it to open ground. He wakes. He breathes. He does not tell anyone for a week, then he does, and someone else says the same. This is not superstition for decoration. This is the body's way of filing memory, assigning a sound to survival when language is too slow. Battlefield ghosts exist, not necessarily in sheets and chains, but in the after music of trauma, in the chorus of names that echo when a door slams too hard. The WPA once collected stories of haints and warnings, dreams that saved a cousin from a flood, a brother from a mule's kick. On Omaha, the warnings were cables and wind, the saving hands and gauze. Yet the logic is the same: a world that whispers just enough to keep you in it. And the rituals. In a corner of the beach later, not day one, but not far, men from the 320th take a minute that did not exist on any schedule. Someone produces a scrap of bread, someone else a dented canteen cap. They kneel in sand gritty with metal and murmur a prayer that belongs in a wooden church far inland. A prayer about body, about blood, about memory. The medic is there, not leading, not following, simply present. They do not perform theology, they perform belonging. And then the minute vanishes back into work. The facts keep tally. Unit S3 logs balloon losses X, replacements Y, anchors emplaced Z. The numbers build a scaffold for the day. The medic's tallies are more stubborn lives stabilized. Bodies turned toward rear, hours kneeling. His own wound recorded in a sentence: too short shrapnel laceration, self-treated, resumed duty. The comma might be the bravest mark on the page. If you need stronger proof, the Army provides it slowly. An award packet assembles, moving at the speed of bureaucracy, which is to say, not the speed of blood. Witness statements are gathered. Signatures march in columns. The language is precise, careful, perhaps too careful, and the file goes where files go up, across somewhere else. In the interim, the beach does not wait. It already wrote the first citation in Breathing Men. Meanwhile, the folklore spreads faster than any paper. In foxholes inland, a private says, "If the balloons are up, we live." On a transport, a sailor swears he saw a figure at waterline that no wave touched. In a hospital ward, a man whose pulse had wandered comes back and asks, "Where's that colored duck?" And the nurse says, "Which one not? Because there are many, but because the answer matters less than the breath inside the question." A city church back home adds a line to its prayer list: "Our men beneath God's balloons," and the congregation understands without a briefing. The Harlem papers pick up the rumor and heat it into print. They run photographs of balloons like tethered moons and set them above columns about courage. They interview mothers who talk about sons with calm hands and long patience. They ask pointed questions of officials if the work is indispensable. Why are the honors delayed if the sky is safer? Why is the story quieter? The questions do not land where they're aimed at first, but they fly a long time. Back to logistics. A late summer memo notes that balloons on certain sectors pushed enemy aircraft above the most lethal trajectories. A statistic glints lanes cleared X% faster when low strafing decreased. The number belongs to no one and to everyone, and it writes itself into the ledger as if it had always been there. Facts, when they finally arrive, often pretend they didn't need help. The battlefield ghosts return in new uniforms. A man wakes in stateside quiet and hears the beach. Not the guns, but the hum. He follows it to his kitchen stands with his hand on the cold metal of a chair and waits until the sound runs out. He tells his wife, "It's just the line singing." She nods. They do not explain to their children. They do not need to. The children will inherit the story anyway, as a caution, as a lullaby, as a reason why certain storms make Daddy sit still. And there is the matter of names. Some names slip. The beach chews them. The forms misfile them. The newspapers forget the spelling. Fate unknown. A column shrugs a phrase that once hid kidnapped bodies in plantations now inheriting the ocean's appetite. But folklore is a hoarder. It keeps names behind the teeth of a song. In the hinge of a story told the same way every winter, in a photograph that remains on a mantel after the face has traveled on. The medic's name, the one we follow, survives in both registers, whispered and written, sung and sworn. Facts again for balance. Equipment tables list helium versus hydrogen, wind limits, required anchor weights for wet sand. After-action corrections recommend better ground stakes, improved winch teeth, thicker gloves. The 320th folds these into practice without ceremony. They have no appetite for myth at the expense of method. Folklore can bless a hand, but only training keeps a knot from slipping. And yet under the method, the rituals persist. Some men touch the cable before a shift, like the brim of a hat before church. Some make a small cross in the air. Others murmur grandmother words that predate doctrine. The medic does not rebuke it. He understands that bodies often need a gesture to obey a command. He performs his own small rite, checks his scissors, taps each pocket, breathes out twice before he steps into someone else's pain. If you must call it superstition. If you're honest, call it readiness, wearing a familiar coat, when the day's long roll finally slows. When the command posts move inland and the beach becomes the rear of something new. The paper takes a breath. A headquarters clerk writes, "Colored Balloon Battalion performed to expectation." The sentence is tidy, shamefully small. Folklore adds the missing language in whispers, in pews, in corners of barracks where radios crackle. They made the sky safer. They kept death higher. A medic on the beach answered with gauze when the world demanded blood. Between tidy and true, a nation learns to stretch. In time far too late, committees will reconvene. Files will be reopened, recommendations dusted. The press will push, families will persist. Historians will coax numbers to admit they stood on the shoulders of hands. Recognition will climb the slow staircase. But none of that changes the arithmetic already paid for the seconds stolen from oblivion. The breaths counted back into bodies. The long geometry of cables against a murderous sky. So let the record both kinds stand together. Fact writes the scaffolding dates, units, losses, gains. Folklore furnishes the rooms, the hum in the wire, the taste of iron under a hymn, the dream that warned a man to lift his head just before the wave. The medic belongs to both houses. In one, he is a line item treated approximately a comma between events. In the other, he is a promise that calm can be chosen, that skill can be sacred, that a man told where he does not belong can redraw the map by kneeling exactly where the world needs him. And if you listen very late when the beach is only a shape in history, you might still hear it. The cable note threading a quiet room, the breath a body takes after deciding one more time to stay. Dawn leans in, again, a thinner gold, a quieter wind. The beach has changed costumes from screaming gray to a weary amber, but it is still the same stage scored with footprints and promises. Balloons sway like tired sentries, Cables hum a softer note. Far inland artillery thumps with the patience of distant giants. And on the wet sand beneath a tarp that used to be a roof for crates, the medic sits, hands slack for the first time in hours, listening. He counts his breath, 1, 2, a habit that kept men from falling off the edge of pain. He looks at his kit the way a carpenter looks at a bench after the flood. What's left? What needs mending? What can be made from what remains? Gauze dwindled to a stubborn roll, morphine near empty, scissors nicked, the small mirror cracked. His own shoulder-wrapped one-handed seeps through the bandage like a confession. He could by any sane metric stop. He does not. A shout, not loud, but shaped like an emergency, slants through the hiss of surf. Doc. The voice breaks on the second syllable. Two men stumble into the lee of his tarpaulin, carrying a third on a door scavenged from God knows where. The carried man is ghost pale, lips bluish, uniform soaked from chest to knees. No obvious wound, the tricky kind. The medic thumbs the carotid, nothing. Then a flicker, then nothing. The men holding the door look at him as if he were the last bridge before the river. Down, he says, not unkind, and the door becomes a table. He lifts the jaw, pinches the nose, breathes for a stranger because no one else can. The chest rises stubborn, reluctant, and falls, and he breathes again. Someone whispers a prayer. He cannot hear the words, only the cadence, and he times the next breath to that cadence. A long moment passes, and then finally the chest decides to obey. A cough, a sputter, a miracle disguised as reflex. The men laugh the way soldiers laugh when death changes its mind with relief that borders on hysteria. The medic leans back, shakes his head once to clear the sparkles from the edges of vision, and ties the man to the door with triangular bandages. To the beach road, he says. Don't stop. If he slips, thump his chest hard. They nod like parishioners. They go. A shadow falls across him. He looks up, an officer clean only by rank. The man squints at the tarpaulin, the stretcher line, the buckets of bloody water. You need to be seen by a surgeon, the officer says, pointing at the medic's shoulder. The medic glances at it as if surprised it belongs to him and shrugs with the other one. Later, he answers. The officer hesitates, then extends a canteen. A small sacrament passes between them. Carry on, the officer says, and the phrase, usually paper stiff, sounds almost like respect. Then the shiver, a wind shift, subtle as if the beach had turned its head to listen. Above, one balloon yawns against its line and drifts in toward land. The crew at the winch shout, hold, hold, pay out. Now, and the cable sings as if plucked by a giant finger. The note is higher, thinner, urgent. The medic hears it and knows without knowing the math that the sky is about to fill with something fast and armed. It happens as if the hum invited it. A fighter low and sudden slashes along the waterline, a metallic hawk hunting panic. Men drop by reflex. Sand leaps into the air. The medic half crouches out of instinct, then runs toward the nearest unprotected pair, dragging a wounded man. The fighter spits a seam of tracers, draws a bed of hot bees across the beach, and then almost elegantly, the hawk flinches. The pilot has seen the cable too late. He yanks higher, the bullets rake water instead of men. The lane he intended to scissor turns into a warning flare in his own head. He climbs. He is gone. The balloons do not cheer. The men do in their bones where cheers are the size of one more breath. The inflection arrives not with a trumpet, but with a series of decisions that tilt the day. More balloons hold than tear. More lanes open than close. More men cross the killing ground without being named by a strafing line. The 320th's geometry, quiet, stubborn, edits the air until even stubborn death concedes a yard. And then the center, the point where a life and a war draw a line across each other. The medic is crouched over another stranger when the mortar walks in 3 steps. 4, a pause, and then a step exactly where he is. The world blanks out the middle, a white flash, a slap, a hole in the soundtrack, and then returns ringing. He blinks grains of sand from his eyes. He tastes iron. For a moment the hands regard his body like a thing they used to own. He orders them back. They comply slow, as if moving through syrup. Blood maps a new river down his rib. He could roll to the side, could surrender this scrap of shade, and let someone else inherit it. But the man in front of him is going eyes skidding, breath stuttering, a mind jumping pain to pain like a bird in a glass room. The medic puts his palm flat on the sternum, not forceful, just declarative, as if to say, "Stay." "Look at me," he says, voice lower than the sea. "Here. You're here." Words sit in the air like tent pegs stubborn against wind. He leans his ear, listens past the ringing. There, it is a thready measure. He rides it, coaches it, ties a thin knot between 2 worlds. Time recoils, and then returns in a rush. A hand grips his elbow. One of the balloon men, face gray with dust, peers down. "Doc, you're hit." The medic nods once, as if acknowledging weather. "Tape," he says. The man tears tape. The medic splints the stranger's arm with a scrap of board, the sort of improvisation that makes surgeons curse and thank you in the same sentence, then gestures toward the litter team. Go. They go. He sits back, the horizon wobbling, as if on a string. He breathes until it steadies. Somewhere to his right, the winch growls, paying out smooth, then locking, then paying again. The crew hums under their breath, a human metronome for a stubborn machine. The medic hums with them, without knowing it. For a few seconds, the cable and the chorus are the same note. A figure steps into the frame, a war correspondent coat, salty notebook bleeding through. He stares at the balloons, at the men under them, at the tarpaulin with its small kingdom of suffering. "What's your name, Corporal?" he asks. The medic looks up, the question reaching him from a high altitude. Names feel like luxuries here, extras that belong on days with tables and plates. He says it anyway. The correspondent scribbles, looks at his eyes the way journalists do when they think they've found a sentence. "They said..." He begins, then stops, as if the phrase is suddenly foolish in this weather. He tries again. "You've saved a lot of lives." The medic answers with the only arithmetic that matters. "We've saved what we could." Inflection is often a simple exchange of ground. A hill taken, a bridge held. Here it is the exchange of understanding. Across the beach, men who might never have spoken at homework, shoulder to shoulder, balloon crew. Infantry coxswains, bulldozers in human form. Segregation, that tidy paper fence, dissolves in spray. A lieutenant who would take a separate road in a separate town holds a cable with black hands, grunts, and says to no one in particular, "Hold." Together. And that, though the clerk will never type it, is a small victory no less real than a bunker silenced. By afternoon, the medic's world narrows to a tunnel that runs from one pair of eyes to the next. He is a bridge others cross. He counts seconds aloud, like a spell. He cauterizes panic with tone. He refuses to let go of men who are halfway between. He whispers a piece of a hymn, because language sometimes needs a rhythm to be brave. He ties off an artery with a motion so practiced it looks like grace. And yet, he is not invulnerable. A wave of tiredness moves through him like cold. The body, generous until now, presents its bill. His fingers go dumb for an instant, then listen again. He realizes with a kind of distant surprise that the blood in his boot is his. He tightens the improvised bandage on his calf. He drinks from a canteen that tastes like old pennies. He works. The climax is not a single act. It's a run of them, struck like matches, until the box is almost empty. A young private barely old enough to shave arrives white-lipped, carrying a friend who is more blood than person. "Help," he says, voice new and ancient. The medic pulls the friend onto the table, door opens the chest with hands that don't tremble because they haven't been taught how to listen. Here's an argument inside the ribs, argues back with a needle, with pressure, with timing. The friend's eyes clear like a window wiped with a sleeve. The private gasps, and then laughs, and then sobs, and then says it as if it were the first sentence he ever trusted. "They said you couldn't." He doesn't finish. He doesn't need to. The air does it for him. A balloon crewman jogs up, grinning despite the grime. "Doc," you hear he pants. Air's quiet, quieter. He jerks a thumb at the silver bodies overhead. "They don't like our ceiling." The medic allows himself one smile, a breath length long. "Good ceiling," he says. "Keep it." The man nods and vanishes back into his wind. Late light pours into the hour like honey. The worst has shifted inland. The beach, while still cruel, is less greedy. The medic's station empties toward the rear, fills, again empties a tide under the tide. He sends a last stretcher. He picks up the shattered mirror, catches a sliver of his own face, a stranger he recognizes. He laughs once softly, half at the joke, half at the fact that the joke found him here. Then silence. Not total, but enough. The hum of the nearest cable is now a lullaby. The medic sits. He sets his hands on his knees. He looks at the sea the way you look at an old adversary after both of you have lost enough to be honest. The correspondent, still nearby, still writing, asks almost shy, "What will you remember?" the medic thinks. He glances up at the balloons, at the lines slicing the sky into safer pieces, and then down at his stained gloves. "The sound," he says. The correspondent misunderstands the guns. The medic shakes his head. No, the wire singing, and men breathing after, when it stops. Inflection settles like dusk. Somewhere behind the bluffs, someone plants a flag no one will argue with tomorrow. The 320th ties off the day, literally checking knots they could undo in their sleep-padding anchors as if they were animals that earned praise. The medic inventories, his emptiness bandages gone. Morphine gone. Strength almost gone, and smiles anyway, because the lack is proof of something done instead of something merely planned. They said he couldn't fight. That they couldn't. That service had to be footnoted. The beach answered with helium and rope, with breath and pressure, with a long, quiet no. The climax is not a shout. It is a refusal repeated until the world tilts. And the inflection, the hinge upon which the day swings from horror toward endurance, is a man who should have lain down, who did not, and who taught the air itself to behave, just enough for others to live. Night returns gentler. The balloons lift their round backs against a deeper sky. Somewhere far away, a church choir rehearses, without knowing why a certain note feels like salt and iron. The medic finally lets someone else touch his wounds. He winces once, then breathes the way he taught 100 other chests to breathe. Above him, the cable sings the faintest thread of a hymn. And for a moment, brief, perfect, the beach and the pew and the promise are the same room. Morning returns to Omaha, then recedes. Then returns again, each day less jagged than the last. The beach that once bit like iron dulls into photographs and maps, then into captions, then into the shorthand of memory. Balloons come down patched and deflated. Cables are coiled like serpents that have shed their skins. Bulldozers grind inland. The tide erases footprints with the patience of scripture. The war keeps moving, always forward, while the men who held the first mile learn to live with the sound of it still in their ears. The medic ships out, ships back, stands in rooms that are too quiet for a while. He discovers there are kinds of silence, and the one he faces now is the hardest. The silence that expects you to explain what the sea already knows. He works anyway, because working is how he told the world the truth on the beach. And because hands that have learned the grammar of breath do not forget their verbs. Years stack. Paper thickens. Committees meet, adjourn. Recognition moves like winter sun, low, slow, late. Files open, close, open again, a hinge that squeaks more than it swings. Witnesses age into their own silence. Editors change desks. Historians pry gently at drawers. A nation relearns a sentence it should have known by heart that courage is not a rumor, and that the color of a uniformed hand has nothing to do with the steadiness of its touch. Meanwhile, the legacy takes simpler shapes. In a church basement, a nurse instructor holds up a field bandage and says softly, "Someone taught me this by saving my uncle." In a family kitchen, a son watches his father hold a coffee cup too carefully, as if it were a beating heart, and understands that some tenderness is learned under fire. On a city stoop, an old balloon man tells a boy why the sky is safer when you think about it first. And the boy who has never seen a barrage balloon nods as if physics were a parable, which on certain days it is. Harlem papers yellow, ink thins, and yet their argument survives, pasted in scrapbooks, folded into glove boxes, quoted from pulpits. They said we couldn't fight. The sentence changes key across decades, from defiance to testimony to curriculum. Teachers tape it above chalkboards. Cadets underline it in classrooms where the seating charts no longer segregate courage. The phrase that arrived as an insult leaves as a drumbeat. Historians track the 320th through warehouses of paper shipments, rosters, wine tables until the numbers admit their debt. They map lanes, cleared strafers, deterred hours bought back from a greedy day. They speak softly when they say the medic's name, not because he is fragile, but because the work he did made other voices possible. They avoid grand words. The record does not need them. It needs accuracy and the kind of reverence that feels like measurement done properly. Folklore keeps pace, refuses to fade into mere decoration. The cable hum appears in veterans' sleep long after the last balloon has been folded. A choir in Baltimore sings with a fleeting salt in its vowels one Sunday in June. No one knows why the phrasing lengthens on "Guide Me." But the old men in the back pew nod and smile into their palms. A grandson, restless in his room, hums a note he has never been taught, then goes downstairs and asks for a story that will let him fall asleep. He is told about a beach, about a wind, about a man who pressed his hand against a chest and asked a stranger to stay. And the stranger did. The medic walks through middle age with quiet shoulders. He works in hospitals where fluorescent light replaces shell light, where the only roar is HVAC and the only tide is visiting hours. He learns to be thanked without embarrassment. He learns there are days when the thanks doesn't come, and he keeps working anyway. He keeps a small object from the beach, a mirror shard, a tag, a buckle that had no owner left tucked where a hand can find it when the night is longer than it should be. When asked, he says, it is a reminder of what he does not specify. Some sentences belong to the speaker alone. Decades later, a stage, a lectern, names read aloud. Families stand in shoes that ache with the weight of waiting. The air stills as if even HVAC knows to hush. Words like valor and distinguished climb the microphone. There are pins, ribbons, papers embossed to make the seriousness visible. You can argue that it took too long, and you would be right, but you cannot argue that the breath in the room does not change when a particular name is spoken. People clap not brittle applause, but the kind that lands like rain on parched ground. Somewhere in the back row, a balloon man closes his eyes and hears the wires sing again. He smiles at a ceiling that finally learned to honor the music. Communities remember in other registers. A mural appears on a brick wall, a medic in olive drab palm, open bandage trailing like a banner. Under him, small moons with leashes hover no longer oddities but guardians. Children ask what the floating things are. Older men answer with one sentence that turns utility into myth. They kept death higher. A science teacher runs cable over a classroom ceiling and hands out kites. The children learn tension, lift, angle. And someone inevitably hums, and the hum fills the room with a seriousness no bell can ring. Modern soldiers, men and women who live in a different army, read the old rosters and see themselves in the columns. They carry tourniquets in pockets that once carried less. They recite a quiet liturgy in the field bleeding airway breathing that is older than any acronym. Some of them keep a note in their phones, calm is contagious. They do not always know where the sentence came from. The sentence does not mind. It came here to work, not to be credited. And the beach. What of the beach tourists stand where men once crawled? They read plaques. They try to imagine the wire and the wind. The sea performs innocence, that old trick, and some are fooled. Others squint as if they could hear what water keeps in its throat. If you stand there at the right hour between weather and weather, you may catch it a thin vibration in the air with no visible source. A note you can feel in the bones of your face. The aftersound of a cable that finished its song and refused to stop resonating in the world it helped keep alive. We close not with a lesson, not with a headline, but with a return. To a man kneeling in rain. To a balloon leaning into wind. To a nation learning again how to say thank you correctly. We return to a phrase that arrived on a dirty breath and left as a promise. They said we couldn't fight. And the answer, patient, untheatrical, is still being given wherever steady hands choose to stay. Listen. Carefully. The wire is quieter now. But it hasn't fallen silent. It threads our rooms when storms pass. It hums in hospital corridors at shift change. It lingers in the pause before a name is spoken aloud. If you hear it, breathe once, twice. Let the note settle. And remember the morning when a medic taught the air itself to make room for one more life.